happening, everybody? And welcome back to the Chaplaincy on the Go podcast. I'm your host, Josh Zorhoff. I am a teaching pastor and therapist living in the West Michigan area. I'm also a corporate chaplain for companies around where I live. And this podcast is brought to you by the Fearless family of churches. And we are grateful to continue on this journey of emotional health and wellness. We've just finished up a long conversation on Steve Carter's book, The Thing Beneath the Thing. And I'm excited to start a new conversation with you today about grief and loss. Grief is something that everyone goes through. It's a process. And loss is something that everyone experiences at some point in their lives. And a lot of work that I do as a counselor and as a pastor and as a chaplain is work with people who are going through a season of loss in some way or working through their grief in some way. And we navigate that together. And so we want to have a conversation on that, but I don't want to do that alone. Joining me for this podcast is a good friend of mine named Deb Brink. Deb Brink is a counselor at Winning at Home, a wellness agency in Holland and Zeeland, Michigan. And if that name sounds familiar at all, that's because Dave McGovern, my friend who was on this podcast earlier in this season, also works at Winning at Home. They have some of the best counselors in the West Michigan area. And I've known Deb for a while now. I worked with Deb for a while, and she is a wise sage when it comes to dealing with grief and loss. We had such a great conversation about this, and I am so excited to share it with you. And so if you know someone who is going through a loss or a season of grief, or maybe you have gone through loss in a season of grief, I think this is going to be a really helpful conversation for you. We're excited to start this conversation, and we're going to get right into it. Well, welcome back to the podcast. I'm here with Deb Brink. Deb is a counselor at Winning at Home. She's a friend of mine. We worked together for a short time when I was counseling at Winning at Home. And Deb, before you introduce yourself, I just want to share something cool that I heard about you from Dave McGovern, who was on this podcast earlier. He said that you were a mixture of Gandalf and Yoda combined. And if you know Dave, that's high praise from Mr. McGovern. And so Deb, just tell us a little bit about you and tell us a little bit about what you do at Winning at Home.
Thanks, Josh. It's so great to be here. I love this opportunity to just talk with you about some things that we are just going to unpack today. I am a therapist at Winning at Home, and believe it or not, I've been there for over 15 years. I think I'm going on 16 years. So that's pretty amazing. I love coming alongside people and journeying with them in whatever situations they are facing. I feel like it's beautiful, meaningful, such fulfilling work. And I get to be a part of life change, and I get to just be along with people on their journey and give them different techniques and strategies from the counseling world, and also just journey with them. So God has been so good and really shown up in so many ways over the years. So I'm grateful.
Yeah, that's amazing. That is 15 years. That's unbelievable. That there might even be some people listening here that aren't even 15 years old. I'm just throwing it out there.
Correct. Yes.
That's very possible. And and yet those 15 years have taught you a lot about navigating some pretty profound situations when it comes to things like grief and loss. And that's what we want to really lean into over the next couple of sessions, over the next couple of episodes. Tell us a little bit about grief and loss, and what is your experience with that, and how do you help people navigate it?
So grief is really in loss is really grief is really our experience in response to loss, right? It's a
Mm.
natural emotion. It's universal. All of us are going to have to experience grief and loss at some point in our lives. It's super important that we understand a few things about grief. It's universal, but it's also unique to each of us,
Mhm.
right? Most of the time when I'm running into situations with grief and loss within my office, a lot of people are like, okay, Deborah, when is this going to feel better? When am I going to feel better? We want a roadmap. We want something that tells us, come on, how long is this going to take? And so, really, a few things again that are important is there's no shortcut through it. There's no
Mm-mm.
way to get from A to B. It's a long, windy road. It's a process, right? It's not something we do once. It can't be fixed or cured, right? If we face our grief, though, and we attempt to navigate it in a healthy way, it does have the potential to teach us a lot. So
Wow.
that's something to think about. Also, grief really forces us to reevaluate our lives, right? Where will tell my clients who've lost loved ones anyway, is you're on a brand new road, and it's usually obviously one we have not chosen, right?
Mm.
So we have to reevaluate, we have to rebuild, and we have to remap our lives. And that's very difficult work, right? That is tough work that we have to do. But if we're faced with a choice of honoring and acknowledging our grief and tending to it without being consumed by it, and that is really
Mm.
a choice that we have to face, right? It's difficult, but we can hold our sorrow and we can move ahead at the same time. And that's a challenging thing to do, but it's really an important thing to think about.
Wow. I think I'm just kind of processing through the statement of grief being universal, but also unique. And, I'm reminded of a story, a conversation I had with a man years ago who his brother died tragically. And a year later, this young man came in to see me because he wanted to be done grieving
Mhm.
and he couldn't figure out why, like, it wasn't done yet. He said it's been a year.
Mhm.
And I'm sure you've had that. I've had that with people who say, but it's been a year. And I just tell them the first year is the year of the suck. It's the first holiday without them. It's the first birthday. It's the first Christmas. It's the first New Year. It's all of that. And there's no playbook for that. You could be driving down the road and see a sign on a billboard, and you could be reminded of some event or think about some event that that person will not be a part of,
Yep.
and you lose it. And this young man, he said to me, I text my brother every day hoping that he will respond.
Mm. Yeah.
And he was like, I don't know why I can't stop that. And I think that's the first. I mean, I love your language of like, we have to remap our life. You're on a whole new road that you weren't prepared to go down because loss isn't natural.
Mm-mm.
Loss is unnatural. And it's not supposed to happen. We're not supposed to lose people. We're not supposed to have the people we love die. We were never created for death. We were created for life.
Correct.
And
Yep.
so something deep down inside us actually cries out, even if we don't have a perspective on faith. There's something inside us when we come face to face with death that says this is wrong and it shouldn't be this way.
Correct. Yeah. That's right. So we battle, right? We battle within us because we would like to either maybe push it away or run away from it, Or a year later, we show up and we say, what in the world? This is still such a part, this loss is still such a part of my daily life, right? And then in the most gentleness and the most self-compassion you can find, again, you have to tend to that.
Yeah.
Right. Clarissa Mole, she's written a really beautiful book called Out of the Darkness. And she talks a lot about how we need to make grief our companion. We can flourish and thrive, but we take our grief with us. We actually embrace and befriend it. And I know some people will be like, I'm not embracing my grief. It's too painful. And I completely get that. Maybe we could think about it though. Maybe we could think about acceptance, and different things about how we could take our grief with us as a companion,
Yeah.
Versus battling, raging against it. And sometimes we have to do that too. But I think that's a beautiful concept.
I do too. In some ways, so, and that maybe this is a terrible analogy and I'm just thinking about it. So if it doesn't work, then, we can say that doesn't work and try something else, Josh. But if I have to take my son to the grocery store and he is not wanting to go into the grocery store, I have two options. I mean, I have three. I could not go into the grocery store, but then we would be hungry. If I have to get groceries, we have to go in. I can either take him in kicking and screaming and dragging him behind me and be exhausted, or I can pick him up and hold him and carry him with me and do what needs to be done. The end result is the same. I'm going to get the groceries.
Yes.
But one is actually going to increase my relationship with him and actually bring peace in my life. And the other is going to exhaust me and make me more frustrated. And I'll probably forget some of the most critical groceries that we need. And I think that is that picture of seeing grief as a companion is helpful in that way. I tell clients that grief can be avoided temporarily, but it will not be ignored long term.
It will not.
It will come up. And if you don't face it and you don't embrace it, it will come up in times and places where you do not want it to come up. I remember I was another young man who lost his brother. I get a lot of those, turns out. And it was probably 6 months, 7 months after the fact. And I had given him my number just to say, I did the funeral for his brother and said, hey, if you need somebody to talk to, you're processing, like, I get it. Consider me a resource. Like, I'm here for you. He saw an advertisement for a wedding. It was a tuxedo advertisement. And it was all of these men together in their tuxedos celebrating the wedding. And this young man called me in tears, could barely even speak, because in that moment he realized, my brother will never see me walk down the aisle.
Yeah.
And he had avoided a grief that would no longer be ignored.
And the hard part, again, about avoiding grief is often then we end up like creating our own prison almost, or being victims, and so then it's really hard to live in that place, because typically that is a place of a lot of anger, a lot of bitterness, a lot of resentment. And we hold on, right? And it becomes the thing that defines our life, right? Instead of the significant event in our life that has obviously impacted us, that we will carry with us for a long time, but it becomes the event that keeps us, in that prison. And that's why, the courage of that young man who came to you and said, I saw that picture of those men in their, tuxedo celebrating a wedding, and the courage of him to talk with you about that is so significant and so important, because
So
that's how we deal with, that's how we can again own and move forward in our grief, right?
so let's talk about that, because I I work with I work with a lot of men,
Hmm. Yeah. And
and
I work with a lot of women. So
yeah, so perfect. Um, and I'm not gender stereotyping. I'm just saying, in my experience, um, uncomfortable emotions are not the forte
mm-mm.
in a man's vocabulary.
Right.
And I'm sure you've seen some of this research as well, but the dominant way of expressing emotion for men is to be angry. It is the emotion that we learn as children first. It is the one that we express easiest. And a lot of times, what I see in delayed grief or in unexpressed grief is bitterness, anger, sarcasm,
Cynic-
and go ahead.
Cynicism. Hmm.
Cynicism is, and for those of you listening, there's a difference between sarcasm and cynicism. Sarcasm is usually masked, playful banter. Sarcasm is when it's when we try to make a joke to protect ourselves. Cynicism is when we actively use our words to criticize someone else. We're not protecting ourselves. Sarcasm is defensive and cynicism is offensive. And it's a graduated form. So that's my experience. My experience is men who delay their grief usually go to bitterness, anger, sarcasm, and cynicism, and resentment. And then unfortunately, the people that they love and the people that are around them are the victims of their unprocessed grief.
Okay, so that right there is so important, what you just said right there. So I believe all therapy is grief work,
Mm,
because we're either struggling again with something we have that we don't want to have, or wanting something that we don't have. So anyway, that's a whole other thing. But the loss part, so again, that young man, or how men cope with emotions, what I often try to talk with my clients about is, and I never try to simplify grief, because it's not simple. There's not a nice little bow we can
no.
tie around it. No, no, no. So, but I do talk about 3 C's. So the first C is you get to choose, right? So no matter how deep you are in your grief, you still have the dignity of choice. You can still choose, how am I going to respond to this? What am I going to do? Right. And the second C is connect. And so we do need a team around us when we are grieving. We need to find those people. It
Mm,
can be 2 people, even sometimes 3, 4, maybe 5, but it doesn't have to be 20 people, but 2, 3, 4 people who are willing to journey with us, be compassionate witnesses to our grief. Sometimes counselors can be super helpful in that, but it also loved ones, right? And then communicating, that's the third C. So what you just said about this young man, we end up, when we keep our grief and we become resentful, angry, and I've seen women do this too, we aren't able to love, right?
mm,
Love is the real reason we want to work on our grief, because we want to love, we want to love, we want to continue to love in spite of our loss. And that's difficult to do. But if we don't do the grief work, we can't love well, and we do more damage to ourselves and our loved ones, right?
mm. Could you just repeat those 3 words again? I think those are 3 really important words for people to hear.
Yeah. So choice is the first word. We have, again, dignity and capacity to choose, right? Second one is connect. We want to isolate. We hate grief. We don't want to deal with it, but we need to connect. And then the third one is communicate. And
Mm,
basically that just means be honest. We would prefer more than anything to maybe either we do, I'm fine, how are you? Or, we aren't honest about what's really going on inside of us. And that's why we need, some of these compassionate witnesses to help us.
So choose. You use the word dignity there. For people who go through a profound loss, whatever you call a loss, it could be the loss of a loved one. It could be the loss of a dream.
Totally.
I know friends who have children with unique needs, and they have to deal with the loss of a dream that their child will not present as neurotypical for the rest of their life.
Correct. Yeah.
Whatever you define loss is, when you experience loss, that's a powerful reality. And it doesn't give us any credit to put a silver lining on it or slap a happy rainbow and sunshine and unicorn sticker on it. If it happened and it hurt, dignify yourself. Give that moment, that situation, that event the dignity it deserves, because it matters to you.
It does matter.
And if it matters to you, it matters to God. And so
Yes.
at a minimum, give yourself the dignity to choose that I'm going to deal with this.
Yes.
I matter. My story matters. My situation matters. My pain matters. I think that's so important.
It's so important, and you don't need to compare. Oftentimes we'll be like, well, my loss isn't as bad as this person's loss, so then I shouldn't be dealing with this. So we judge it, we compare it. And even society, we can do that, but it doesn't help us.
No, and
you said loss is loss, and we have to mourn it. All loss deserves to be mourned.
And I think, it's the proverbial, well, there are starving children in Africa, and I have food in my closet, so I should be happy. And one thing that I learned early on in my counseling education, and whenever we use the word should, we're probably in trouble. I should feel fine. I shouldn't be sad about this. I should be grateful. I should. Well, you don't. You don't. Doesn't matter if you should or not. You don't. And so in that moment, at least just acknowledge this isn't okay.
Right.
And I'm going to choose to do business with this. And then I'm going to connect. I've been looking at, and we've talked about it on the podcast too. I mentioned this with Dave, and I did a podcast episode on trauma. So if you're listening and you haven't listened to the trauma conversation, you should. But neuroscience is proving now that the only way to heal fully and recover from trauma is in the context of a safe, confessing community. If you don't have people who are safe, that you can confess what happened, and it is not a group of people to connect with, then you're going to be, you're sabotaging your healing process.
Correct. Yeah. Yeah, that's right. That's right. So important. And yet, again, when we're going through deep loss, oftentimes we are so hesitant about reaching out and about trying to find our team because it's vulnerable, right?
And I think one of the challenges when you're connecting, in fact, we just talked about this today with some church staff. And one of the gentlemen at the table essentially said, I don't have people to talk to. But if I did, I would still struggle to say what's going on. And I don't know why. And I'm not sure what his reason was, but I do know for a lot of people that I work with that part of the reason we don't want to say it is because when we say it, it becomes real. If we keep it in our heads or in our hearts, we can tell ourselves all kinds of stories about where that's coming from, and we don't have to say it out loud, and then we don't have to embrace the fact that it's real.
Right.
I I'm thinking a lot about the young man that came to see me who texted his brother every day.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, I don't know why I text him. And I said, well, is it possible because there's a part of you that as long as you keep texting can say, maybe he'll text me back.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, your brother's gone. And he said, yeah, he's gone. And then he got up and he left and he hasn't been back.
Mm-hmm.
He needed to say it out loud.
Yeah.
He needed to communicate it. Yeah.
Yeah. He's on his journey, right?
Yep.
And you could be with him that day. You could be his compassionate witness that day. Sometimes the hard thing about sharing with someone too, in addition to what you're saying, is that maybe people don't respond the way we are hoping or the way we're wishing. And that can happen frequently too, especially maybe, for instance, with loss of a spouse and you have all your couple friends and then it all changes. And so I would say to that also is so important to try again.
Yeah.
The people that show up, you can find your team. I believe you can. Sometimes you have to let go of people you thought were going to be your team. And sometimes they say things and it's difficult to have compassion over that. But
Yeah.
some people aren't familiar, or as familiar with grief and how it impacts. So
Yeah.
trying to practice compassion along with that's challenging, but that's a piece of it too, right?
Let's just touch on that because I encounter that a lot. I'm hesitant to say all the time because, that's hyperbole, but
Often.
it's a lot. It's often that when I'm working with or sitting with or sharing space with someone who is grieving a loss, I will often tell them, this is the year of the suck. It is. It is every holiday, all of that. We've already covered that. It is also the year of the idiots. And I say that lovingly. We've all said the wrong thing to someone who was hurting because we either didn't know what to say or we were just repeating what someone else said to us, or we thought we were being helpful. But let me just, if you are going through a loss, prepare yourself. Someone is going to say something that is not going to be helpful. And I believe people aren't trying to be malicious. I believe people mean the best. They want the best, but they might say something like, oh, heaven got another angel,
Mm-hmm.
which, by the way, if you've ever said that lovingly, that is not theologically accurate. We do not become angels when we die. In fact, just if we can riff on it for a moment, the Bible tells us that we were actually created a little bit higher than the angels, which means if we became angels, we'd be getting demoted. So just what we know about death is when we die in Christ, we are with the Lord. Heaven does not get more angels. It doesn't need more angels. And so I know that's a little bit of a rant. And if you've said that, God loves you, he forgives you. That's the truth. But please don't say that anymore because it's not true. And by the way, it's not helpful because it actually makes it sound like God wanted that person to die so he could have them with him. And remember, we were created for life, not death. And Jesus died and rose again so we could enter into life. And so I'm sorry, that's a bit of a tangent for me, but you're nodding here with me. So I feel like we're in the same camp a little bit.
Can we all be fellow, sojourners in this? Can we all be careful when we are being trying to be comforting to a loved one, to a friend? Can we not come up with the pat answers? The most effective way we come alongside those who mourn or those who are suffering loss is we listen, we walk with them, we tell them we are there for them. We again, we're those compassionate witnesses. I think what we tend to do is we want those answers, right? And we want to to be comforting. So we tend to say some things like that because we want to make sense of it. And really, a lot of it is having to accept and journey through, right? So, yeah, please, can we be careful in how
Yeah.
we respond? Please, can we not just throw, verses, Bible verses out there or try to make sense of something that often is a mystery?
Yeah. And if we are, in fact, talking to someone who has lost a loved one, there's literally nothing that we could say that would bring that person back. And that's all people want in that moment.
Mhm.
And so, no matter what we say, no matter how good it is, no matter how educated it is, no matter how accurate it is, it will fall short of the ache of the soul.
Yep.
And so if you don't know what to say, that's okay. Say, I don't know what to say. I can't imagine what you're going through.
Right.
I don't even know what I would do.
Right.
And just be there. And if you don't know what to say and you don't have the words, then don't say anything. There's this, have you seen Little Miss Sunshine?
Mhm.
Oh, there's this really powerful part. I'm just going to tell our listeners, you should watch Little Miss Sunshine. So good. But there's this really powerful part in the movie where a young boy has suffered a loss and they're at this funeral, and each of the characters in the movie tries to sit down and encourage him and all the things, and everybody fails miserably, and then this little girl comes and sits down by his side. She says nothing. There's just awkward silence. And then he looks at her, he says, okay. And he stands up and he walks away. And for
Mhm.
me, that is such a picture of what it means to just be, well, I can't say anything to you that's going to make you feel better, but I'm right here
Mhm.
and you're not alone.
Yep.
The power of our presence with another person who is hurting is significant.
Yeah. It's powerful. It is. It's very significant.
Mm.
And I think sometimes we get afraid of it because we don't know what to say or what to do. But I want to encourage, those of you out there, to your presence is what matters the most. Your presence, care. Yep. So important.
Yeah. Well, I am so thankful that Deb could join us for part one of this conversation on grief and loss. It was so helpful for her to frame this universal and unique experience of grief and also share with us what it means to go through it and also journey through it with someone else. We're going to continue this conversation on part two of grief and loss. We've got some more from Deb. She has some more to share with us. And so I'm looking forward to sharing that with you in our next episode. If there was something that was helpful for you or something that reached into your soul in this podcast or triggered you maybe in some way, we love to help with that. If you're going through a season of loss, if you're going through some seasons of grief, we'd love to journey with you. Send us an email to chaplaincy@fearlessfollower.org. And we would love to just talk with you about it, maybe even help connect you with some resources, people like Deb, or organizations that could help you work through your grief. And if you work for a company and this is something that your company is working through, maybe you've had a loss in your company or you've had some seasons of grief in your business and you're struggling through that, reach out to us. You can check us out at fearlesschaplaincy.org. We love to come in and help companies work through emotional health, mental health, wellness, spiritual wellness. We love to help companies work through wholehearted living. And and if this was a benefit to you at all, would you share this with somebody? Maybe somebody in your life that you know is working through grief and loss. We'd love to help be a resource for them and help them enter into a journey of healing through that season. So we're looking forward to what Deb has for us next time, and we're excited to continue this conversation with you. We'll see you later.